Hello fellow YouTube friends, followers, fools and flabbergastos, my name is Maceland and it's time for Elder Scrolls Online On Point Combat Basics. In this video we're going to talk about critical hits. In the context of critical hits, I'm going to cover critical chance, damage and critical resistance. And without further ado, let's start with critical chance. Healing and damage skills in Elder Scrolls Online have the ability to critically heal or critically strike. Whether skills use spell critical or weapon critical is determined the same way as in the base stat scaling. Damage skills and heals that scale with magicka-based stats will use spell critical chance and vice versa. Health-based heals will scale dynamically and use whichever chance is higher. At the time of making this video, item sets that deal damage or heal directly are unable to critically strike. All characters in Elder Scrolls Online on maximum level have a base critical chance of 10%, which is increased through sets, passives, buffs, etc. The system for critical chance can be a bit confusing because for some reason critical chance and resistance are mostly shown in flat numbers, but also sometimes in percent values. The conversion between the two is pretty simple: every 219 points of critical chance add 1% to your character stat sheet. So a basic set bonus that gives you 657 critical chance adds 3%. Let's look at the formula. We have the base damage, which is what we calculated last time, times 1 plus the critical hit chance times a question mark, which we're going to cover later. CHC here is the critical chance, which is equal to 10% plus the sum of percent bonuses plus the sum of flat bonuses divided by 219. Since there cannot be a chance higher than 100%, the stat critical chance caps right there. So any bonuses you invest beyond that are wasted. It is hard to get there in practice without sacrificing too much of the other stats anyway. Alright, let's move on to critical damage and healing. Characters in the game at maximum level have a base value of 50% critical damage and healing, which can also be, the same way, increased by sets, buffs, passives, etc. It's important to know that critical chance and critical damage interact multiplicatively as pretty much the only two stats in the game. Now looking at the formula again, we can simply replace the question mark with the critical hit damage. In this formula, the critical hit damage equals 50% plus the sum of all bonuses that you have available, less the target's critical resistance, which we will talk about in a second. The formula for critical healing looks very much the same, the only difference is that you do not have to account for critical resistance. Since the two stats critical chance and critical damage interact multiplicatively, the benefit you get from increasing one of the stats depends on the value of the other. In this context, it's also important to take a closer look at the tooltips because some bonuses boost both damage and healing while others do not. The buffs Major and Minor Force boost only your damage, while the Shadow Mundus also boosts healing. Okay, let's move on to critical resistance. On maximum level, every 66 points of critical resistance equal 1%. Enemies in PvE have 0 critical resistance, so it doesn't matter there. In PvP, player characters have a base critical resistance of 20%, and you can increase that further through item sets, champion points and traits, for example. Keep in mind that you cannot reduce the critical damage that others do to you below the base value. The formula for this is simple: we have 20% plus the sum of percent bonuses plus the sum of flat bonuses divided by 66, and this is then simply subtracted from the critical hit damage from the enemy. Okay, so this was quick and dirty, let's move over to summary and gear options. In PvE, the critical damage bonus is generally very high due to lots of buffs and debuffs that increase it. Values way beyond 100% are not uncommon. Since the critical resistance of enemies there is always 0, critical chance is usually the most desirable attribute right after armor penetration. Armor penetration is going to be covered in the next video. This is why sets like Medusa, Mother Sorrow, Advancing Yokeda or Leviathan are so popular in PvE for damage purposes. A frequent question that people ask is whether they should go for the Thief or the Shadow Mundus. If you want to know the answer, all you need to do is to calculate the ratio between the two. With full Divines, the Thief grants around 10.5 critical hit chance and Shadow grants 19% critical hit damage. The ratio between them is therefore around 55.35%. Then look at your own ratio of critical chance and critical damage without the Mundus. If your ratio is lower than the one between the two Mundus stones, for example your critical chance is 30% and your critical damage is 120%, the Thief is better. If it is the other way around, for example with 60 and 80% respectively, the Shadow is better. The simple calculation is not limited to the Mundus stone decision though. You can apply that to any kind of situation that requires you to decide between crit chance and crit damage. In PvP, the situation is completely different. The availability of critical resistance there is the reason why critical chance is not as worthwhile. Critical hits deal way less damage in PvP, so it's only natural that critical chance is not as powerful. So aside from a few niche builds that are used for ganking, you will not find a lot of builds centering around critical hits. Item sets that are very popular in PvP, such as the Mythic Ring Malakath's Band of Brutality, totally balanced as usual by the way, further incentivize an emphasis on a base damage over critical hits. Now, in order to make sure that you don't think I'm talking nonsense, we're going to do a couple of example tests to verify the math that I've used here. The template I'm using is the same template as last time, a warden with empty skills and stuff. I'm not testing critical chance here because that is a time sink. You would have to do quite a bit of large sample testing to verify the character stat sheet in several different cases, and the same applies to healing. So I'm going to focus on critical hit damage here. The only passives I enabled here are the champion point passive Fighting Finesse and Minor Force from Channeled Acceleration, plus the Thief Mundus and the champion point passive that grants critical chance for a bit more reliable critical hits. This nets a total amount of 20% on top of the 50% base value, so let us observe how much damage the target takes on a non-critical hit, calculate the theoretical damage on crit and then observe whether we are correct. For this we will use the major skill damage over time skill Entropy. In order to test the critical damage, I simply hit the precursor dummy here with the damage over time ability and waited for one hit to critically strike. The non-crit hit amounted to 474 as you can see in the combat log. The expected damage gain is 70% based on the passives that we have, so we would expect a critical hit to be at 807 damage. Let's look at the combat log to see what actually happened. The value was 807. This verifies that the critical hit damage is stacking additively and also shows that the formula I've used is correct. Critical healing works the same way. Let me just get hit by this plant here and then put a heal over time on myself using the healing morph of Entropy. The combat log in this case shows a non-critical heal of 398 and a critical heal of 636. That is, opposed to before, a 60% critical healing bonus. As we can see, the bonus to healing is only 60% because Minor Force does not grant bonus healing but only damage. Fighting Finesse on the other hand grants both. So again the formula is correct. We're done. I hope that you now have a better understanding of critical hits in ESO. Feel free to like and subscribe for the YouTube algorithm and see you next time.